Good day and welcome to FDM, the channel dedicated to Ferra data models. Well, it's Friday and time for our weekly update on the Are We Winning series, where I look at the global pandemic, draw a few graphs, use FDM to do some analysis and comment on that. And today I want to start with the figures. This is the figures for today, the 5th of June. And globally, there's 6.6 million confirmed cases, almost 400,000 deaths, which is 5.9% of the total. The leading countries in terms of confirmed cases are the US, Brazil, and Russia, where you can see there's the number of confirmed cases, the deaths, and here you have the percentages. Death as a percentage of confirmed cases, 5.8, 5.5, and 1.2. Big discrepancy here. Immediately in the top three already, there's a big discrepancy. Now these three together combined account for about half of this figure. So if I just eyeball it, the average there will be way below the 5.9. So the other half of the world, the fatality rate should be quite a bit higher. Push the average up to that. Let's look at South Africa. There is South Africa amongst its peers in terms of confirmed cases. We are joined by Sweden, Ecuador, and Singapore, and widely different fatality rates. Sweden, of course, didn't really lock down, so that's maybe understandable. Ecuador, look at that, high rate. And South Africa, actually a very, very low rate compared to the rest of the world and amongst this peer group, really extremely low. I suppose we can count ourselves lucky. And then there's Singapore. Singapore deserves a round of applause. If anybody from Singapore is listening to this, well done. You guys did a marvelous job. Singapore reached out, they supported the World Health Organization, they assisted Indonesia and other neighbors, and locally they really managed to do well. They've got one of the highest infection rates in the region, and yet 24 fatalities is next to nothing. 0.06%. It is marvelous. They say that is because the people there heeded the advice of government, and also because the infections are really amongst the young. Big migrant population. They are the infected ones, and they, because of the age, I suppose, they are doing well. So, but coming back to these percentages, what is the fatality rate? It's really difficult. There's really some big ranges here from, let's say, 0 to 11%. Let's look at New York. There's the top, the US, the top states in the US. New York, 8%. Now, New York's a nice one to look at, New York State, because the pandemic has blown over there. You can use that sort of as an example of how the pandemic will work its way through a population. That's what I'm going to do today, because it's largely blown over, and I hope we can follow in their footsteps. But the fatality rate was 8%. New Jersey, the second largest in terms of confirmed cases in the US, 7.4%. And then again, going to South Africa's peer group, around about 40,000. You have these states and these fatality rates. So I think for any pandemic, a fatality rate of about 1% is bad. That's a bad, really deadly pandemic. So these things really seem high. They seem, of course, Singapore. But it seemed a bit overdone, and it's easy to imagine that the confirmed cases are well below the actual cases. We didn't test everybody, so if these cases go up, then of course this will go down closer to, let's say, 1% or something thereabouts. I don't know if the deaths would be over-reported. I don't know. Maybe somebody died because of COVID as well as cancer, but because he had COVID, although cancer was more responsible because he had COVID, there's a bit of over-reporting, and it's possible, but I think the side to fix would really be the infections. So, so these things should be pushed up quite a bit also to get this down to about 1%. So it's really strange to try and make sense out of these numbers, or to try and learn lessons from other places if the numbers don't apply universally. So, but let's look at the figures in FTM. Let me get to FTM. Okay, I've already updated all of the data and the reports, and what I also did was to add New York State to some of the graphs, as I'll show you in a moment. Because in New York State, the pandemic has blown over largely, and I want to see how it blows over and if that applies to South Africa. But let's go through the usual stuff first. Let's look at new infections. And there you go. Now, I discussed these figures quite a bit in the previous video, so for now, just these numbers are not really meaningful. They've all been calibrated to the same value at some point in time in order to allow me to compare our progress from a certain point. So those numbers doesn't mean a lot. We should look at trends here. And at the moment, South Africa is swamping everything else. This red line is the model. That's what I hope we can beat, and actually beat by a wide margin. There you see the world dribbling along that line, more or less. The US initially overshoot quite a bit. Initially, the US looked at South Africa, but now South Africa is scaling that out so much that it's difficult to see the trend here. But at least the US is going in the right direction. South Africa, however, struggling, really struggling. So let's look at it a bit closer. Let's look at the relative figures. Okay, so now this is not the scaled ones I looked at earlier, but this is relative to population size. Again, you have the model there relative to global population, and there's the US. The US is hit much harder than the world on average, but at least the US is sort of going in the right direction. Maybe this last week or two is because of the unrest and all the demonstrations and protests there. But the US is moving in the right direction, and it's doing so rapidly. That's a nice, fast trend, and if the US can keep that up pretty soon, the pandemic will be out of the system. South Africa, however, it seems we're only starting. We're only starting, which is worrisome. Okay, let's look at some other figures. Let's look at the deaths, the fatalities. Here you see the fatalities, the world fatalities. There you see the US fatalities. Again, the US hit really hard by this pandemic, and not doing well. I mean, compared to the world, they are really not doing well. In South Africa, although our fatalities are much better than the world compared to our population size, we are picking up. We are picking up, and although it's really good to be below that figure, we are moving in the wrong direction. Okay, let's look at some more. Now, what I'm doing in this particular instance is to use the fatalities or the deaths, and the argument goes like this: if one person dies today because of COVID, then 2 weeks ago 100 people were infected. So I assume a fatality rate of 1%. So each one death implies 100 people were infected 2 weeks ago. And this is also explained this last week, and this is what you get. So there you see the implied infection rate in the US from the death projection. That's what it stands for. So I lead it by 14 days, and I multiplied by 100, and it's much bigger than the reported figures. So the true figure is probably in here somewhere, the true infection rate, but this gap is so wide that it's difficult to make sense of it. For the world, you get this figure, and for South Africa, you get this figure below, which is, again, because of the US, we can't see it, so let me zoom in on that. Okay, so let's look at South Africa. Now, first of all, I'm going to look at New York. The exact same argument and calculation for New York State. I take the deaths, multiply that by 100, and push it back 14 days. Okay, and this is what's happening in New York. Now South Africa is below here, so as a percentage of population, South Africa and the world is not even visible on this scale. So we can't complain in terms of a percentage of population. The deaths here are extremely low. But I will change the scale in a moment so that we can zoom in on that. But let's look at New York. Now, in New York, as you can see, largely this pandemic has blown over. This pandemic there, it was at its height, must have seemed like the end of the world. And from there, this is what happened. And by now, it's more or less out of the system. Now, just to explain this area you see here is our lockdown level 5 period in South Africa. So this got no relation to the New York. But coming back to New York, if we use this as a type of a guide of how the pandemic works itself through a population. Now, New York's population is a third of South Africa's, more or less. So let's use that as a proxy. Then it takes about 2 months. If I look at this scale, it takes about 2 months for the thing to peak, and then after it's peaked, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say it takes about 4 months to work itself out the system. It's about 6 months in total that you're in crisis mode, but 2 months that you see there's a rapid increase, and then 4 months thereafter to get it under control and get it out the system. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is to take New York and put it on this axis, so that these ones will be stretched out a bit and so that we can see. So let's go into FDM's functionality, and I'm just going to put that one on the west axis. Okay, so now there you still see New York, but now New York is on this side. And as you can see, the current, just to set these scales equal, I would have to multiply this one by 100. New York was, the fatalities, they were 100 times more as a percentage of population than in South Africa, just to compare. However, this is the situation in South Africa. There you see the new infections and the 7-day moving average of that, right? And whereas previously we were below the world, we are now doing much worse than the world, and we are rising rapidly, or the model, I should say. But the world is more or less on the model, so we are doing worse than the world in terms of the infections per population. If I use the number of deaths to project the infections, that reverse calculation I explained, this is the situation, and this is worrisome. But let's play the New York game here, and immediately it's actually difficult. Remember, you had 2 months for the thing to build up. We've been building up for much longer. But let's take the last 2 months. Let's take the last 2 months and say that this build up compares to this build up. Let's hope that's the case. That means we should peak soon, and then after that peak, we should see this kind of a trajectory. That's, of course, what I hope for. If that's going to happen, I actually doubt that, because we first have to see the peak. We haven't seen the peak yet. So let's hope for the peak within a month or so, and then once we've seen that peak, then we can compare this again to see how long it will take to get this out the system. But that's it for today. See you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.